You are already awake when the bell rings. You do not remember the exact moment you left sleep. At some point in the night, the line between dream and waking thinned, then tore, and you found yourself lying on the rough pallet with your eyes open, listening to the city breathe under the weight of the siege. When the bell in the nearby tower gives its low, iron-throated call to the watch, it feels less like a summons and more like a confirmation of what your body already knew. You push the blanket away and the air bites instantly at your skin. The small chamber where you sleep with 3 others smells of wool, leather, and the sour, stale heat of men who have lived too long in their armor. Someone snores once, sharply, then turns over. Another mutters a prayer into his cloak. You sit up, rubbing the grit from your eyes, and the first thing you do, before you even reach for your boots, is touch the wall. The stone is cold, colder than it should be in late May, as if it had swallowed all the night's fear and packed it tight into its core. Your fingertips trace the chisel marks, the tiny pits where weather and time have gnawed. Generations have leaned on this wall, trusted it, cursed it, bled against it. You feel for a moment like a late guest at a long-standing argument. You pull on your boots. The leather, stiff from yesterday's sweat, resists your heel before yielding with a faint sigh. Then the belt, the tunic, the mail shirt that settles on your shoulders with the familiar heaviness of obligation. You do not yet buckle the breastplate. That comes later, on the rampart, when the sky begins to turn from black to iron. For now, you move more like yourself and less like a statue of yourself, half finished. Outside the chamber, the stairwell curls upward in a narrow spiral. Torchlight spills weakly along the steps, licking at the edges of damp stone. You climb by habit, one hand on the central pillar, the other brushing against the wall where the plaster has long since worn through. The tower's stones are old enough that you no longer think of them as built. They simply are, like rock faces or riverbeds. As you climb, you feel the drums. At first, it is only a suspicion, a faint tremor in the air, a suggestion that the tower's heartbeat is not entirely its own. Then, a few steps higher, the sound begins to separate itself from your pulse. Slow, deliberate blows rolling across the ground from beyond the walls. You do not hear them with your ears so much as with your bones. A dull, distant thud that finds its way into your knees, up your spine, across your teeth. You reach the small landing where the chapel door stands half open. A thin line of lamplight cuts the darkness, painting a pale stripe across your mail. Incense leaks out with it, the smell soft and sweet and somehow entirely unsuited to the hunger outside the walls. You pause, as you always do, though you do not go in. You rest your fingers briefly on the doorframe, feeling the grooves where other hands have done the same. Familiar words rise to your lips, not as a thought, but as an old path your mouth remembers. Kyrie eleison. You don't whisper, you don't need to. The words exist, and that is enough. The drums answer nothing. You push upward again, and the air grows harsher. The torchlight fades. The last few steps belong to the night. Ahead, the narrow opening to the wall walk gapes like a missing tooth, a black trapezoid cut out of the tower's side. A faint breath of wind reaches in, bringing with it smoke, horse, and the stale tang of countless campfires that are not yours. You step out onto the rampart and the city drops away on one side, the enemy on the other. For a moment you stand between them, feeling their twin weights on your chest. Inside, Constantinople sleeps restlessly beneath a sky that has not yet decided to be morning. The roofs lie like low, dark waves, some tiled, some thatched, all damp with a night mist that the sea has blown inland. A few scattered lamps still burn in upper windows, little pockets of defiance against the hour. A woman watching, a child crying, an old man unable to abandon the habit of rising early, even when dawn brings nothing but more worry. Somewhere a dog barks once, twice, then falls silent, as if remembering how much noise has already been spent on the world. Outside, beyond the wall, the Ottoman camp stretches in a broad, patient arc. its fires burning in disciplined rows. By daylight, the tents show color and rank. Now, they are just darker lumps against the dull glow. A second city laid out with chilling order at the foot of your own. Above them, the sky is a low, colorless lid, pressing smoke and breath and expectation down on both sides of the wall alike. You walk along the parapet to your post. Your boots remember the way. They have traced this path so often that the movement feels less like a choice and more like fulfilling a pattern. The flagstones are worn where countless feet have passed, edges rounded, some stones subtly lower where weight has always favored one side. Here, a gap where a merlon fell years ago and was never properly replaced. There, a small depression stained darker, where rainwater collects and never fully dries. A reminder of storms that paid no attention to armies. At your assigned place, you stop. There is a small stack of arrows waiting for you, their fletching ruffled by the breeze, their points dark and clean. To your right, a barrel of water with a thin film of dust and ash floating on its surface. To your left, leaning against the crenel, your shield, wood and iron, paint flaked from the emblem, rims scarred by old blows that have lost their immediate stories, but not their marks. You set to work in the practiced ritual of inspection. You touch each arrow, feeling for cracks in the shaft, loose heads, split feathers. Your thumbs move of their own accord, rejecting some, setting others aside as good enough for a day when perfection is a luxury no one can afford. You adjust the strap of your helmet, mindful of the way its rim used to bite into the base of your skull, until you learn to line it with a folded strip of cloth. You lift the shield, test its weight, feel the familiar complaint in your shoulder where an earlier skirmish left bone less certain than it once was. The drums keep playing. Sometimes they roll in long, even strokes, as if steadying the breath of thousands. Sometimes they come in bursts, clusters of blows that seem almost like speech, a language you do not share but cannot ignore. You imagine the men out there, Turks, Janissaries, mercenaries from lands you know only as names spoken in other soldiers' tales, standing up from their bedrolls, tightening their belts, knotting their turbans, checking the edges of their blades by feel. You do not hate them. Hatred is too heavy to carry on top of iron and obligation. What you feel is closer to a stubborn grief that they must be where they are and you must be where you are, and the wall between you is thick enough to keep your hands apart, but thin enough that your fates can still touch. On the tower to your left, a bell begins to toll. Not the alarm bell. That sound is sharp, frantic, meant to cut through sleep like a blade. This is the slower, deeper call at the changing of the watches. The note rolls along the wall like a wave, washing over men in twos and threes as they swap places, stamping feet, flexing fingers, passing brief remarks that vanish into the air before you can catch them. A priest comes along the parapet, his cloak snapping in the wind like a badly furled sail. He is grey-bearded, the hair at his temples matted with sweat and incense smoke. He carries an icon in both hands, arms slightly bent under its solid weight, a painted virgin, dark-eyed and solemn, the gold leaf around her worn thin where generations have kissed it. Evlogia, he says to each group of men, voice soft but carrying. He does not stop to speak with you in any real sense. He lifts the icon. You bow your head. He traces a cross in the air, the motion brisk, efficient. The gesture is both intimate and completely impersonal, like being touched lightly on the shoulder in a crowd. You kiss the wood as it passes, lips finding the familiar chipped corner. For a heartbeat, the drums seem farther away. Then he moves on, cloak swirling, taking the fragment of sanctuary with him. The taste of old varnish and salt stays on your mouth longer than the comfort. Behind you, the city shifts. From up here, movement is mostly suggestion. A door opening, a cart being pulled, a small procession of lanterns threading through a side street toward one of the larger churches. Somewhere down there, the emperor has walked in torchlight between shrines, kneeling before relics, pressing his forehead to stone that was old when your grandparents were children. You did not see this. You know it the way you know the names of the saints whose icons hang in the tower chapel, through repetition, through the way other men speak of it with the same tone they use for weather and death. You think of him briefly, not as a ruler, but as another body moving through the same narrow corridors, pressing his hands to as many walls as he can reach. Your fingers drift again to the Merlin beside you. The stone here is rougher than inside the tower. Wind and rain have chewed on it, leaving tiny hollows where lichen once grew, before the siege trampled even the plants into obedience. You find a shallow crack, no wider than a fingernail, running diagonally across the surface. A line you do not remember from the last weeks, though you cannot swear it was not there. You press the pad of your thumb into it, feeling the small change in texture, the suggestion that everything solid is secretly, slowly rearranging itself. The wall has always been described to you as a fact. The Theodosian walls, older men would say with a kind of pride that made their spines straighten, have never been taken by force. They said it like a name of God, a phrase that carried its own proof, needing no further argument. Standing here now, feeling the crack that does not care about legends, you realize that never is less a promise and more a bet laid long ago, continuously renewed by men who are already in their graves. You wonder what word will be used about today, when you are gone. The thought unsettles you less than it should. Perhaps that is what siege does, stretches fear so long that it thins into a kind of weary curiosity. You look out again at the camp, searching for signs that this morning will be different from all the others. You find them. The arrangement of the fires has changed. There are more of them, clustered nearer to the line where the ground rises toward the moat. Dark shapes, siege towers and great bombards mounted on low platforms stand against the dim horizon like half-finished statues. You have seen them for days, their assembly, their testing, the way each shot made the very stones beneath your feet flinch. Now you notice more movement around them, teams of men hauling powder and stone, officers on horseback pointing, gesturing, their silhouettes precise and intent. Closer to the walls, in the zones their artillery has already torn into a pockmarked field, you notice mounded earth where sappers have dug forward under cover of night. The line between their trenches and your moat is shorter than it was 3 nights ago. You do not need an officer to tell you this. Your eyes keep their own count. The sky lightens by degrees so subtle they would be invisible, if not for the way edges sharpen. The top of a minaret pricking the pale, the thinnest threads of smoke starting to show color, the outline of your own fingers against the stone. Dawn is not a single event. It is a negotiation between shadows and surfaces. Behind you, along the wall, more men take their places. Voices rise and fall, low jokes, last-minute instructions, the breathless recitation of prayers learned as children and forgotten until cannon fire taught them a new urgency. Armor creaks, bowstrings are tested with small plucking sounds that remind you of a musician tuning an instrument for a performance nobody truly wishes to hear. A captain passes, boots hard on the stone, cloak snapping at his calves. He checks the positions with a practiced glance, the archers spaced along the parapet, the men with long spears ready near the stairwells that lead down to the outer defences, the barrels of water and oil in their places, the piles of stones set aside to be dropped on any hands that reach for the top of the wall. He catches your eye. For a moment, his gaze holds yours. Not as an officer inspecting a subordinate, but as one man measuring another's readiness in the face of a day that will ask for more than skill. His mouth tightens, not quite a smile, not quite a grimace, and he nods once. The gesture lands with surprising weight. It is not reassurance. It is acknowledgement. You are here. You are counted. He moves on, shouting instructions you do not fully hear because the drums have grown louder. The rhythm has changed. What was once a slow, sustaining beat has become more complex. Overlapping patterns that drive into one another, rising like a woven chant. You imagine lines of men out there beginning to form. infantry being marshaled into columns, janissaries gathering beneath their commanders' banners, cavalry tightening cinches and adjusting stirrups. Each drum commands more than ears. It organizes breath, muscle, intention. You realize that on this side of the wall, your own heart has been answering that rhythm unconsciously. You feel slightly angry at this discovery, as if the enemy has stolen some invisible part of you and bent it to his use. The anger steadies your hands. You take up your bow. The string hums faintly under your fingers, worn but reliable. You pull it back without an arrow, feeling the full curve of the wood, the protest and then acquiescence of its fibers. Your shoulder complains, and then remembers its role. You release. The empty twang writes an invisible line into the air, a promise that there will be others, heavier, soon. Along the wall, other men do the same. No command is given for this. No one needs to be told to check the one thing that will decide whether they can reach across the gap between walls and camp with more than just their eyes. You notice the horizon. You have stood this watch many times, but today, the eastern edge of the sky seems sharper. The line between dark and not dark, more deliberate. Colors are still absent. Everything exists in shades of grey, from the palest ash near the encroaching light to the deep, slow black that still clings to the western sky above the city. The sea, glimpsed between towers and houses, is a flat, featureless strip. The world feels as if it has been sketched quickly in charcoal, waiting for someone to decide whether to finish the drawing or tear the paper. A gull wheels overhead, crying once in a voice that sounds offended that war has cluttered its air. You think suddenly of home, not the city, which has become a kind of extended body for you, but the smaller place beyond its walls where you were born. A village near the sea, a courtyard where grapevines climbed a cracked wall. Your mother's hands, stained from crushing olives. The memory arrives not as a scene but as a sensation. The texture of dry earth under bare feet, the particular angle of light in late afternoon when dust motes hang suspended like tiny stars. You realize, with a jolt that has nothing to do with fear, that you cannot clearly recall her face. The siege has worn away many things: food, time, strength, the sharpness of certain features in your mind. It troubles you briefly that the wall and its cracks feel more present to you now than the person whose prayers first taught you to cross yourself before sleep. You look again at the stone. Your hand finds the crack once more, thumb pressing into it, as if you could measure how far it runs, how deep. In the dimness, the line seems almost to pulse. You imagine the entire wall as a living thing, a vast body of stone and mortar that has spent centuries holding its breath. You wonder if today is the day it exhales. Somewhere behind you, down in the streets, a church begins to chant the morning office. The voices rise, fragile and stubborn, threading through alleyways and courtyards, climbing staircases, slipping through shutters. From up here, they sound like a single, continuous note, thin but unbroken. Theos Kyrios, ke epephanen imin. God is the Lord and has appeared to us. The words float up to the parapet like smoke from a different kind of fire. You listen, and unexpectedly, you feel your lungs match the rhythm. The drums outside, the chant inside, your own heart somewhere between them. You stand at your post, bow in hand, shield at your side, fingers resting on a crack in the stone that has become, in the last few minutes, more real to you than your own name. The sky lightens another shade. You can see faces more clearly now. The man next to you with the scar over his left eye. The younger archer 2 merlins down, cheeks still soft with the last traces of adolescence. The veteran farther along, whose lips move constantly, silently, as if he is finishing conversations that began years ago. Their armor catches the faint early light in dull flashes, not bright enough to be called gleam, more like the memory of Polish. Beyond the moat, in the enemy camp, standards begin to shake out and rise. They are still too far to read, but you know the main ones. The Sultan's banner, heavy with meaning, carried from battlefield to battlefield. The green flags that speak of faith. the colours of allied contingents whose loyalty might be as conditional as your own survival. They move in the breeze, small and insistent, as if the wind itself has chosen a side. You realise, with a clarity that cuts through all the noise, that there will be a moment, soon, when the first cannon will fire. You do not know exactly when. You cannot see the gunners tamping powder, the fuse being prepared, the careful tamp of the rammer. You have learned, though, to feel the way the world seems to silently lean forward just before that sound. The way birds lift abruptly from the ground, the way conversations chop off mid-sentence, the way your own body, without your consent, gathers itself the way it does before jumping from a height. You feel that leaning now. The air itself seems to tighten, drawn across the distance like a bowstring. The light is still too thin for sharp shadows, but edges sharpen. Crenels, merlons, spear points, the crisp line of the distant siege engines. Your own breath seems louder in your ears. You become acutely aware of the exact weight of your mail on your shoulders, of the roughness of the leather under your palm, of a drop of sweat tracing a slow path down between your shoulder blades. You think absurdly of bread, of the hard crust you chewed last night, thinking not of taste, but of whether there would be enough next week, of the bakers who rose before dawn, even under siege, kneading not just dough, but the anxiety of a city into loaves that vanished faster than they could be baked, of what they are doing now, if any of them are still working, or if flour has finally lost its last argument with powder. You wonder, not for the first time, if you will ever taste bread without the echo of drums in your mouth. The thought is so small, so ordinary, that it calms you more than any sermon could. You shift your stance. You set your feet a little wider. You adjust the position of your shield so that its rim aligns with the edge of the merlon, creating a narrow, controlled opening from which you can shoot and see without inviting every arrow in the world to find you. The city behind you holds its breath. The camp before you gathers itself. The wall between you is still a wall, for now. You stand on the rampart in the colourless hour before sunrise, feeling stone and air and fear and resolve all press against your skin at once. And somewhere deep in your chest you understand that the day has already begun to decide you. You feel it before you hear it. The world tightens, draws a breath that isn't yours, and then lets it go all at once. The first cannon speaks. The sound is not like thunder. Thunder cracks and tears and then wanders away across the sky. This is lower, closer, a blunt, deliberate roar that seems to come from the stones themselves. For an instant, the air around you turns solid, pushing into your chest, flattening your lungs, making your ears ring with a muffled, metallic buzz. Then the impact hits the wall. The stone beneath your boots jolts as if waking from a long, unhappy dream. Dust spits from the joints in the masonry, leaping into the air in pale bursts that taste of lime and age when they reach your teeth. You feel the vibration climb up through your legs, into your spine, into the back of your skull. It rattles the edges of your vision. Men along the parapet flinch in a staggered line, like grain under a gust of wind. A second shot, slightly to your right, slams into the outer face of the wall. The impact is below your line of sight, but its effect arrives in a spray of stone chips that hiss overhead like a swarm of angry insects. You duck behind your shield without thinking. Something sharp grazes your forearm through the mail. A sting, then warmth seeping under the rings. Around you, shouts wake fully. They aren't coherent at first. Exclamations, curses, snatches of prayer. Then the practiced calls slip into place, like soldiers taking their assigned positions. To the breach! Stones! Archers! Ready! Orders crack along the wall, voices fighting to be heard over the continuing cough of the guns, for the cannons keep firing. The initial shots, spaced and cautious, become a rhythm. First the deep bellies of the great bombards, each report a separate event, slow and murderous. Between them, quicker barks from smaller pieces, sounding almost impatient. The Ottomans are feeling out the wall, testing the grain and weakness of the stone, the way a surgeon tests flesh. you learn, in the space of a few minutes, to distinguish the different voices of the guns. There is one that serves as a kind of drum major, a monstrous thing whose discharge makes your teeth ache and your knees flutter. When it speaks, the entire wall seems to swallow and then exhale dust. You know without seeing that this is the piece the enemy loves most, the great cannon whose name has already travelled through the city like a badly told rumour, the one cast specially for your destruction, fed with metal and ambition, and the promise of payment measured in fallen cities. Each time it fires, the wall shivers under you like a struck bell. Between those blows, smaller guns clip at the masonry, chewing away at the edges of the wounds, turning cracks into fractures, fractures into questions. You force your attention outward. The enemy lines beyond the smoke are moving now with an inevitability that makes them seem less like men and more like weather. Infantry columns tighten. Shields rise in overlapping patterns, forming crude shells around advancing groups. Engineers push forward wooden screens on wheels, mantlets, behind which sappers can work. Teams of men haul ladders to the front like bundles of giant crooked bones. The drums, which all night have been a distant pressure, now match the pace of feet. Their rhythm is no longer a background pulse. It is a command: forward, lift, brace, push. You can almost see the beat ripple along the ranks as men adjust step and breath to its insistence. Archers! The order comes from somewhere down the wall, raw and hoarse. It doesn't matter where. It runs like fire along dry grass. You raise your bow, knock an arrow from the stack at your feet, draw until the familiar burn stretches from shoulder to wrist, and sight along the shaft into a world that has become partly visible and partly suggestion through the hanging veil of smoke. You aim not for faces. They are too small at this distance, but for patterns. A cluster of men struggling with a mantlet, their heads bowed, their arms extended. You loose. The string bites your fingers. The arrow arcs in a clean line, vanishing into the haze. You do not wait to see if it finds an eye, a throat, a gap between plates. You already have another shaft knocked. You fall into the rhythm you have trained for. Draw, aim, loose. Draw, aim, loose. The sound of your own bow joins hundreds of others, a dry, snapping crackle that threads itself between the cannon's roars. Arrows travel in sheets, lines of dark suggestions against the lightening sky. Some splinter against shields. Some vanish into bodies unseen. Some plant themselves uselessly in the churned earth. The enemy answers with their own volleys. Black dots rise from their lines, like a flock of startled birds turned cruel. You see them coming, and lower behind your shield, shoulder-braced, head tucked. The hiss of arrows passing overhead is a quick, intimate sound. Some strike stone with a sharp, brittle tap. Others thunk into the wood of the shields, quivering briefly as if unsure whether to stay. A man 2 positions to your left grunts as one finds the flesh between his pauldron and his neck. Blood spills down his collar in a narrow, shiny strip. He doesn't fall. His hand gropes, finds the shaft, and snaps it off in a motion so practiced it might be habit rather than heroism. He keeps shooting, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed not in agony, but in the effort of keeping focus through the pain. You don't speak to him. There is nothing to say. Another cannonball slams into the wall, closer now. You feel the approach as a rising pressure in the air, then a violence localized and precise. The stone lip of the parapet buckles inward a few paces to your right, a chunk of merlon exploding into jagged fragments that scythe through bodies and air alike. One man simply ceases to be where he was. The space he occupied becomes a spray of red and grey and splintered wood. There is no time to mark him as a person. Hands reach, drag the wounded back, shove others into the gaps. A barrel of water overturns, spilling its contents across the stones, turning dust into paste that your boots slide in. Someone curses, not at the enemy, but at the clumsiness. The loss of that water, which might have been drink, might have been weapon. Stones. Forward. Move. Men heave at the prepared piles of rock, rolling them toward the damaged section. The idea is as old as walls. When stone is taken away by the enemy, you give it back to them, one piece at a time, dropped from above. You grab a smaller block, fingers slipping on its gritty surface, and help wedge it into position. It is absurd in a way, this attempt to repair in seconds what is being methodically demolished by machines born of patient months. But absurdity has never stopped necessity. You feel the fine grit grinding into the cuts on your hands. Blood and dust make a paste that sticks to your knuckles, dries quickly, cracks when you flex your fingers around your bow. The air grows thicker. Powder smoke, sour and sharp, rolls up from the base of the wall where the cannonballs strike, from the enemy lines where their guns belch fire. It carries the sting of saltpeter and char and something else, burned wood, burned earth, the faint singe of fabric. It gets into your nose, your throat, making each breath an effort. Your eyes sting. Tears spring unbidden, not from emotion, but from irritation, blurring shapes into ghosts. You blink them away, aggressively, until the world resolves again into edges and targets. Below, near the foot of the wall, you see movement that is more than just the impact of shot. Sappers. Their task is simple and obscene: to eat the foundation of your wall from underneath. Under cover of their mantlets and the barrage that keeps your head up and your attention stretched, they creep forward in short dashes, disappearing into hollows, trenches, and hastily dug pits. From time to time, you glimpse the pale flash of a pickaxe, the dark curve of a spade. You aim for them when you can. An arrow dropped into a shallow earthwork is a clumsy thing, deflected by dirt and wood. Still, some find backs, shoulders, hands. Now and then you hear a scream that is not from the parapet, a sound muffled by distance, but sharpened by a kind of personal satisfaction. You cannot reach the great cannon with your bow. You can reach the men who drag its ammunition, who tamp its charges, who count the seconds between lighting the fuse and the recoil. So you do. The captain returns, shouting new orders. "Pull men from the quieter sections," he calls, gesturing sharply along the wall. "Reinforce this stretch. You. Down to the outer works." His arm sweeps in the direction of a lower rampart, where the damage seems worse, where the balls have already chewed a jagged bite from the face of the wall. You see it when you glance that way. A raw wound in the masonry, edges bright with fresh breakage, dust still spilling in a lazy curtain. Men are ants there, tiny against the scale of destruction, scrambling to shovel rubble into some semblance of a slope that will be harder to climb. A runner appears, panting, his face streaked with soot and sweat, and something darker on his forehead that might be dried blood or might just be dirt. He stops by the captain, gasps something you don't catch, then points back toward the city. For a moment, the captain looks past you, over the skyline of roofs and domes, towards some unseen point. You follow his gaze. There, in the near distance, you see a small cluster of figures on a tower, no more than silhouettes at this range. One of them wears a cloak that, even in this weak light, catches your eye with its rich, dense folds. You don't have to be told who it is. Rumor has already whispered that the emperor walks the walls, that he refuses to hide in palaces while they are still standing. He is not close enough for you to make out his face. You see only the outline of a man under a weight of cloth and expectations, standing with one hand on the parapet, watching the same movements of siege and defense that you are. For a breath, your line of sight and his align. He is far away. He does not see you, not as a man with a name and a bleeding forearm and dust in his teeth. If anything, he sees a segment of the wall, a collection of helmeted heads where you happen to be one. Yet something in you straightens, not in pride, in solidarity. You are both standing on the same dying animal, listening for its last heartbeat. Another shot from the great bombard cuts through the moment. This one lands closer to where you stand, high enough that the entire parapet bucks like a horse under your feet. You pitch forward, hands grabbing for the merlin. The edge bites into your palms. Gravel and powdered mortar leap up, sting your face, fill your mouth with grit. The sound slams into your chest. For an instant, all you know is white noise and falling dust. When your hearing returns, it does so unevenly. One ear catches the screams first, the raw animal ones from a man crushed under a collapsing section of battlement. The shorter, surprised cries of those merely thrown to the ground. The other ear picks up the continuing drums, now distorted, as if underwater. Between them, your own breath pants loudly, ridiculously close, like you are listening to someone else drowning. You push yourself upright. The damage is worse here. The Merlin 2 paces to your left is gone, reduced to a jagged stump. In its place yawns a jagged opening, wide enough for 3 men to stand shoulder to shoulder. One of them tries. He staggers to his feet, helmet lost, blood running freely from a cut along his scalp. Another body lies half buried under broken stone, a boot and part of a leg protruding obscenely from the rubble. You cannot see the rest of him. You know better than to try to dig him out now. Men are already moving, as if the impact itself injected urgency into their veins. "Fill it! Fill it!" someone shouts. Hands grab at anything that can be moved. Loose stones, planks, even a shattered section of a wooden ladder. The goal is not to remake the wall as it was. That is impossible. The goal is to throw obstacles into the path of advancement, to turn clean breaches into uneven, treacherous climbs. You join them, not because anyone tells you to, but because standing still would feel like abandoning your own bones. Your fingers hook under the edge of a heavy block, muscles straining as you drag it toward the gap. Others help. Together you roll it into place, where it settles with a dull, final thud. Dust billows up, choking, clinging to every sweaty surface. You cough, spit, taste stone. There's no time to be proud of the patchwork. Arrows are still flying. Somewhere below, you hear the scrape of wood on stone as ladders are raised, hooked, tested. A man at the edge of the new gap leans out to shove one away with the tip of his spear, grunting with the effort. An enemy arrow finds the exposed slice of his neck. He drops without a sound, the ladder slipping slightly but not fully falling. You lunge to take his place. The wood underneath your hands is rough, splintered, heavy with the weight of men climbing it from the other side. You can feel them through the rungs, the rhythm of their ascent, their pauses, their adjustments. You shove, putting your shoulder into it. For a moment, the ladder wobbles. A shout rises from below. Then another weight joins yours, someone behind you pushing too, and together you lever it away from the wall. It falls back, slowly at first, then with gathering speed. The men on it scramble, some jumping, some clinging on, their shapes flailing in the smoky air before vanishing from your sight. The crash when it hits the ground is swallowed by the larger storm of sound. You step back, lungs burning. Your shoulder screams in protest. You ignore it. You grab your bow again. The motion feels clumsy at first, as if your muscles resent the constant renegotiation of their tasks. Then habit reasserts itself. Draw, aim, loose. Aim lower now, toward the men rushing forward with the next ladder, toward the hands that grip its sides, toward the faces that tilt upward, eyes hidden under helmet rims. The battle narrows and widens in alternating pulses. One moment you see only the space immediately in front of you, the gap in the wall, the ladder, the next wave of attackers, the man to your left bleeding through his mail, the bucket of stones that needs pushing closer. The next moment, your vision expands to encompass the entire arc of the siege. Guns firing in orchestrated volleys, reserves shifting in the enemy camp, signal flags fluttering on command posts, smoke rising from sections of the wall you cannot see but know are jeopardized by the pattern of cannon reports. Time loses its usual shape. Minutes stretch long between volleys. Then whole chunks of time vanish in a blur of repeated actions. You do not remember each arrow you fire. Only the constant ache in your back and fingers reminds you that you have been doing it without pause. Individual shots melt into a flow, their identities drowned in cumulative effort. Your senses begin to lie to you. The wall sways under your feet. Not in reality, but in the way your battered inner ear tries to reconcile the constant shocks. Sound arrives slightly off from sight. You see a blast of dust and only half a heartbeat later hear the roar that caused it. Your own voice when you shout a warning or a curse sounds thin and foreign, as if another man has borrowed your lungs. In these distortions, some details burn themselves into a permanence that you know will outlast the day. The way a fragment of shattered stone spins in the air, slow and graceful, catching the light as if it were glass instead of ruin. The pattern of blood sprayed against a section of wall, dark and wet, then drying quickly into a rusty map no cartographer will ever draw. The smell of a man's hair singed by a near miss from some flaming device. A reminder that fire is not just a distant, theatrical force, but something that can pick individual targets. At one point, a jar arcs up from below, trailing smoke, a primitive incendiary bomb, a piece of clay packed with pitch and oil, and some foul-smelling mixture that sticks to surfaces and refuses to die. It breaks against the inner face of the parapet, spattering the stones with greedy, licking flames. Men shout, stomping, slapping, throwing sand and water. You see one figure stagger away, hair and cloak alight, only to be knocked to the ground by two comrades who smother him under their own bodies. You smell burned cloth, burned skin. You swallow hard, bile stinging the back of your throat. You keep shooting. Somewhere behind you, a horn sounds 3 short blasts. A signal. Reinforcements shifting. Perhaps a reserve unit being moved to a more threatened section. Perhaps a tactical withdrawal from a position that has become untenable. The meaning matters less to you than the fact that there is still organization on your side, that someone behind the chaos is still counting, measuring, deciding. You cling to that notion, that someone is watching the larger pattern, even as your own world shrinks to the span of your bow and the reach of falling stone. Your arms grow heavy. The bow no longer rises with the same crispness. Each draw requires an extra beat, an extra breath. Your fingers roar from the string, lose finesse. You fumble knocks, dropping an arrow that clatters against the stone and skitters away, useless. You grab another. There is no room for regret about wasted shafts. There is only the next one. Sweat runs into your eyes, carving clean, hot paths through the dust on your face. You blink, smear dirt and salt further across your skin with the back of your hand. Your mail shirt, soaked through, clings to you like a second, colder hide. Then, for a brief, suspended moment, the bombard falls silent. Not all the guns, not yet, but the great one. Its deep, commanding voice disappears from the chorus. The absence is like a dropped stone leaving a hollow in the water. Your ears ring with the echo of what is no longer there. You know what this means. They must cool it, maintain it, swab its barrel, coax it to continue its murderous work. Even a favored weapon has its limits. Metal warps under repeated firing. Too much heat, and the thing might split, betray its masters in a shower of lethal fragments. You feel a cold, mean spike of satisfaction. The wall is not the only thing under strain. The smaller guns keep up their harrying fire. Arrows continue to rise and fall in grim arcs. Men still scream, still fall, still climb. But somewhere in the architecture of the assault, a keynote has softened. You cannot help but take an extra breath. It hurts. Your ribs protest. But the air, foul as it is, seems marginally more willing to enter your lungs when it is not being shoved aside by that immense concussive voice. You look down. The ground at the base of the wall is changing. Where there was once mostly bare earth, pocked by old impacts and dotted with abandoned equipment, there is now a litter of ladders, shattered mantlets, bodies motionless and writhing. Blood has turned patches of dust into dark mud, sticky and treacherous. Men slip in it, attackers and defenders alike, leaving smeared footprints that overlap until there is no telling one side from the other. In that churned, ugly strip of land, the siege's theory dissolves into its practice. Plans fracture on contact with fear, with courage, with sheer bad luck. A brave man dies from a stray stone, while a coward survives by tripping at the right instant. It is chaos, but not pure. Underneath, the drums still beat, the orders still call, the ladders still rise. You realize that the wall, too, is changing. It is no longer the smooth, confident barrier of your childhood stories. It is patched, cracked, stained. Whole sections of parapet are missing, replaced by rough barricades of barrels, furniture dragged from nearby houses, bundles of kindling meant for winter fires. In places, the crest of the wall looks like the teeth of an old man, some broken, some missing, some still strong but surrounded by weakness. You rest your hand on the stone again. This time, you do not seek the small, fine crack from dawn. You feel instead the new fractures, the shallow pits dug by impacts, the fresh scars only an hour old. The wall feels warmer now, not from sun, which is still only a pale smear behind smoke, but from the absorbed violence of the morning. It occurs to you with sudden chilling clarity that you are standing on something that has begun to remember being broken. You could step back. You could move to another section, offer your weight to a tower less battered, a stretch of masonry that has not yet been marked for ruin by the enemy's gunners. No one would call you a coward for relocating under orders. The captain himself has been redistributing men, trying to guess where the next hammer blow will fall. Yet you stay, not out of stubbornness alone, out of a strange, nascent recognition that you and this section of wall share a fate now. Your body has inhaled its dust. Your blood has mingled with the tiny particles of its crumbled edges. Your muscles have strained to shore it up with makeshift buttresses. You are part of its memory as it is becoming part of yours. A small, involuntary tremor runs through the masonry under your boots. Not from a direct hit this time, but from somewhere deeper. Perhaps a support arch below, giving way by a finger's breadth. Perhaps the cumulative effect of countless unseen hairline fractures beginning to connect, like the veins in cracked glass. You feel it. A shiver, delicate and unmistakable, traveling through the stone into your bones. You shift your stance, widening your feet, lowering your center of gravity, instinctively trying to balance not on top of the wall, but with it, like standing with a staggering man and lending him your own weight so he will not fall as fast. You draw another arrow. You notch it, lift the bow, sight along the shaft into the smoky, throbbing morning where the enemy continues its slow, relentless approach. Your arms shake. The string digs into torn skin. The wall leans, almost imperceptibly, against the future. You loose. And as the arrow flies, straight and small against the massive machinery of destruction unfolding around you, you feel the wall beneath you shiver like something alive that has begun to understand its own limits. The order finds you before you find it. It comes not as a single shouted command, but as a series of ripples along the wall, fragments of phrases carried by different mouths, stitched together by urgency. Pull back from outer breach to the inner gate. Move, move. At first you resist the meaning. The instinct to stay where you are, to cling to this section of battered stone you have been pouring yourself into, is fierce and irrational. You feel as if stepping away will make the cracks run faster, as if the wall will sense abandonment and collapse out of spite. Then you see it, not directly below you, but further along the line, a section where the bombard has done more than chip and bruise. The outer face of the wall has slumped inward, spilling stone like sand. The parapet there has folded, its neat crenellated line turned into a jagged, toothless gap. Men who were standing there an hour ago are now ants scrambling on an unstable slope, some dragging others up, some sliding helplessly down toward the moat. And beyond that, in the smoke-thick air, you glimpse the first clear sign that the enemy has touched the top of your wall. A flag, small, on a spear shaft, thrust up by a hand you cannot see. It appears like a question mark punched through dust. For a heartbeat, it wavers, poking into your sky. An arrow takes whoever holds it. The shaft jerks, the cloth dips, vanishes. But in that instant, you understand. This is no longer just an attack on stone. This is contact. Back! To the inner works! Go! The captain is nearer now, his voice breaking with the strain of being used too long and too loudly. His eyes are red, not from emotion, but from smoke and sleeplessness. He is pointing toward the nearest stairwell that leads down into the thickness of the wall, away from the broken section, toward an interior line of defense that has existed on plans and drills more than in practice. You hesitate a fraction too long. He sees it. His gaze snaps to you, sharp and hard, cutting through the haze of confusion. For a moment, you face each other, you clinging to your spot at the parapet. Him, the weight of the whole line pressing invisibly on his shoulders. Move, he mouths. You don't hear the words so much as read it in the shape of his lips, the flex of his jaw. Something gives way inside you, not courage, not exactly, more like a knot of stubbornness that has forgotten it is not the same thing as duty. You grab your shield, your bow, half a bundle of arrows slung by a strap over your shoulder. Your feet resist the first step backward, like a horse balking at leaving its familiar stall. Then the press of bodies around you, men surging toward the stairwell, some wounded, some simply exhausted, sweeps you along. You take one last look at the crack you touched at dawn. You want to mark it, to fix it in your mind. This thin, curved line in the stone that seems somehow like the beginning of the day's story. But dust has settled on it, the surface scarred by new impacts. It has been absorbed into a web of fractures, no longer distinct enough to claim. You let it go. The stairwell swallows you. The transition from open sky to enclosed stone is violent. Light narrows to a cone. Sound changes texture, trading wide, echoing roars for a compressed thunder that crawls along the walls like trapped animals. Men push shoulder to shoulder, some descending, some forcing their way up past you toward still contested sections. The air is thick with breath and the sour smell of fear worked out through pores. You move downward, one hand on the central pillar to steady yourself as the tower trembles with each distant impact. Mail clinks, metal scrapes stone, boots scuff worn steps. Somewhere above, someone shouts and then is abruptly silent, the end of the cries sliced off by either distance or something more final. You pass a slit window, a narrow opening cut into the wall to let in slivers of light and air. Through it, you glimpse the city's interior court, a tangle of roofs, lanes, and courtyards, now alive with motion. People run with bundles clutched to their chests. Lines of carts jostle, wheels grinding against stone. A priest raises a cross in the middle of a crossroad, face red with effort, mouth open in words that are lost in the general roar. You see one small figure, child or slight adult, you can't tell, standing utterly still amid the flow, clutching a clay icon to their chest as if holding a piece of the wall itself. Then the stairwell turns, and the view is gone. You descend deeper into the body of the fortifications. The air cools, damp seeping from the stones where centuries of fog and rain have left their slow signatures. Mordant stains like old bruises streak the walls. You pass narrow doors leading to storage chambers, one open, revealing coils of rope, barrels of pitch, bundles of spears kept as reserve. Another stands closed, iron hasp twisted, as if someone tried to force it and failed. At a wider landing, the flow of men divides. To the left, a passage leads back toward the inner city. You see the flash of blue cloak there, the gleam of an officer's helmet, the frightened pale faces of a few civilians who have found their way into the military arteries of the wall, eyes wide, clutching sacks or children. To the right, a lower, narrower corridor slopes toward the inner gate. That is where the captain points you. "The postern gate," he says. This time you hear him, words thrown like objects into the air. "They'll push through if the outer breaks. We hold them there, no matter what." His hand clamps briefly onto your shoulder, fingers digging into the mail, a sensation both grounding and urgent. Then he shoves you toward the right-hand passage and turns away to bark other instructions. You go. The corridor to the inner gate is less carefully built than the grand stair you descended. The stones are rougher, the ceiling lower, forcing taller men to duck their heads. Torches bracketed to the walls flare and gutter with each passing body, smoke coiling against the ceiling in dark tongues. The floor underfoot is uneven, patched in places where time or dampness has hollowed it. Ahead, the space brightens, opening out into a low vaulted chamber. This is the throat of the city. The inner gate is not as impressive as the main portals you know from the outer walls. It is less about display, more about function. A solid arch with a heavy wooden door bolted in thick iron bands. The hinges are massive, speaking of age and countless openings and closings. On either side of the arch, narrow slits pierce the walls, giving views into the approach corridor, a short, constricted space between outer and inner defences, designed as a killing ground for any who manage to get past the first barrier. You step into the chamber and feel it at once, the concentration of purpose. Men are already at work here. Some stack crates, barrels, and old beams into rough barricades a few paces inside the gate, turning the open floor into a layered defence, wood and stone and bodies instead of pure empty space. Others lug bundles of arrows, darts, and javelins to the loopholes. A pair of soldiers wrestle a cauldron onto an iron tripod, slopping oil as they go, tongues of flame licking greedily at the dark liquid when a torch is thrust under it. The air smells of old dust, fresh sweat, oil, and the faint metallic tang of fear. An officer, lower rank than your captain, but with the same sharpness in his gaze, spots you as you enter. His face is lean, beard black streaked with grey, eyes sunk deep as if sleep evacuated them days ago. "You," he says, gesturing with 2 fingers. "There and there." He points to one of the loopholes overlooking the approach corridor, then to a position beside the first interior barricade. "You shoot until that's useless, then you brace. We cannot let them through here." His certainty is solid as stone. You move to the loophole first. It is a vertical slit, barely wide enough for 2 fingers, widened inside to allow a bit of lateral aim. You press yourself against the inner wall, slide your bow into position, and peer through. The view is tightly framed, like the world has been reduced to a single, narrow painting. You see the approach corridor, the space between the outer gate and this one. It is empty for now. The outer gate itself, visible as a distant, darker arch, still stands closed, wood banded in iron, like your own, but more scarred, more battered. You can hear more clearly here the pounding on its far side. Blows reverberate through the masonry, translated into dull booms and shivers. You imagine what is happening just beyond your sight. Men with rams slamming their logs against the outer gate, others hacking at it with axes, trying to find weak spots. Perhaps sappers working at the base, chipping away at threshold stones. You think of the massive blocks overhead, murder holes ready to pour oil, stones, or arrows into any forced opening. The space between gates waits, naked and expectant. Your own breathing fills the loophole. Short, measured, fogging the cold interior edges of the stone slit. You exhale deliberately, trying to lengthen the breaths, to stop your chest from jerking with every distant impact. The corridor feels like a throat waiting to swallow something horrific. You are lodged in its wall like a stubborn piece of gristle. Behind you, men drag more heavy objects into the chamber. Benches, broken wagon wheels, a door ripped from its hinges somewhere else. Anything that can slow an advance becomes potential fortification. The barricade grows, ragged but high, its gaps stuffed with sacks and smaller debris. You hear the rasp of saws, the thud of hammers as nails are driven in to make loose planks less treacherous to defenders. One of the men heaving a barrel into place groans as his back rebels. The noise is raw, pulled from somewhere below speech. Another slaps him on the shoulder, an unspoken recognition that both know is not truly comfort, but simply acknowledgement. You keep your eye on the outer gate. You wait. Waiting in a place like this is its own battle. On the wall, the enemy is visible. You see their faces, their flags, the arc of their weapons. Here, everything is implied. You hear the siege rather than see it. The gate in front of you denies your eyes, forcing your imagination to do the work. Each heavy thud against the outer door sends a small, disconcerting puff of dust out of the cracks in its frame. The iron bands shiver faintly with each blow. Your mind begins to fill the unseen space beyond with shapes. You picture the ram, a log suspended on chains, a metal head shaped like a beast's skull. You picture the men wielding it, muscles swelling, shoulders bruised, chants on their lips to keep their swings together. You picture their officers above, watching, measuring the damage, ready to rotate tired teams out, bring fresh ones in. You know they are doing the same with their guns. You think of the Great Bombard, its brief silence likely ended by now. Somewhere above this chamber and to one side, the wall is still taking blows. The whole city is like a man being struck in the chest and legs at the same time while trying to breathe. A faint orange light flickers at the top edge of your slit. You tilt your head, angling your view. Smoke threads up from a narrow opening in the ceiling of the approach corridor. They are trying to burn the outer gate now, perhaps. Pitch, oil, bundles of brush pressed against the wood. Fire is a patient tool. Heat works its way through fibers, loosening, weakening, making what was stubborn suddenly willing to give. The pounding grows more frantic. Each impact rattles your teeth. Dust snakes down from the arch above your own gate, a subtle reminder that stone transmits not just force, but warning. Someone calls your name. You pull back from the slit, blinking, the abrupt change in perspective making the chamber feel too wide, too bright. A man you recognize from the wall, a fellow archer whose scarred cheek you saw in the dim dawn, is thrusting a water skin toward you. You drink. The water is warm and tastes of leather and smoke, but it cuts the dryness in your throat enough to remind you that you still have a body beyond the burning line of your focus. Save your strength, he says, voice rough. They'll come. You nod, though the words feel both obvious and strangely necessary. He claps you once on the shoulder, then moves to another loophole, disappearing into his own narrow frame of world. The chamber settles into a taut stillness. No one speaks much now. Tools clink, armor rustles, someone coughs, someone mutters a prayer so quietly it's more remembered than voiced. The cauldron of oil begins to simmer, a sinister, heavy smell filling the air. One of the younger men glances at it too often, eyes wide as if worried it might leap onto him uninvited. You return to your slit. The outer gate looks worse. Sections of its wood are blackened, some charred nearly through. Gaps appear where planks have split, showing thin slices of light where there should be only substance. The iron bands glow faintly at their edges, heat outlining their curves. Smoke wafts inward, pale at first, then darker, threading into your chamber through the cracks and the slit. You squint, trying to see movement beyond. For a moment, the pounding stops. The sudden absence of that blunt rhythm is almost more frightening than its presence. You strain your ears, trying to catch any hint of what comes next. Voices rise beyond the outer gate, a roar, disordered and many-throated. You make out occasional words in a language that is not yours, but whose cadence you have learned to associate with attack, with exhortation, with the demand to spend blood. Then the gate moves. Not the slow swing of hinges fulfilling their design, but a shuddering jerk, an inward bulge. The charred planks bow under some enormous force, then snap in places, vomiting splinters into the approach corridor. A jagged gap opens near the top, wider than any previous crack. Through it, for the first time, you see the whites of eyes on the other side. Their brief glints, fleeting as fish scales in a troubled stream, but they're enough to shift the balance of the moment. This is no longer the abstract idea of an enemy. This is men, close enough to see and be seen, separated from you by a few fingers' breadth of wood and stone. "Ready!" Someone shouts behind you. The chamber shifts from stillness to poised tension. Men move into their prepared positions. A line of spearmen takes up place behind the first barricade. points angled toward the inner gate. Others cluster near the cauldron, thick gloves on their hands, buckets and ladles ready. Archers crowd the loopholes, bows lifted, strings kissed lightly by nervous fingers. You lift your bow again. You nock an arrow. Aim it not into open air, but at the space just beyond your slit, where you know faces will soon appear. Your fingers tighten on the string. You feel the familiar strain along your forearm, up into your shoulder. Your heart begins to hammer in a rhythm that does not belong to the enemy drums. It belongs to the part of you that understands, on a level older than language, that you are about to stand in a doorway between life and whatever comes after. The outer gate gives way. It does not swing gracefully open. It disintegrates. Planks burst inward, hinges torn from their sockets, iron bands twisting, snapping, falling in heavy, clanging arcs. Smoke billows with them, rolling into the approach corridor in a thick, choking wave. Through that moving, grimy fog, shapes surge forward, shields, helmets, blades, flags. The constricted space between gates fills with bodies in seconds. You release. Your first arrow vanishes into the tight press, swallowed by the mass of men forced into a space too narrow for comfort. There is no need to aim high. The enemy is close enough now that precision is more about rhythm than placement. You draw and fire again, and again and again, each shot punching into the crush. Some find shields, thudding into wood with muffled resistance. Some glance off helmets, sparking briefly. Some vanish without visible effect, but you know that somewhere a man staggers, drops, is trampled by those behind him, who have no space and no time for his fall. Others find softer targets. You see a face. For a moment, it's just another shape in the chaos, a jaw clenched too tight, eyes too wide. Then your arrow's flight intersects with the small gap between chin and throat guard. The man's mouth opens in surprise. He tumbles backward, vanishing under the tide of his comrades. You do not let yourself linger on that image. There is no room in this corridor, either physical or mental, for the luxury of individual grief or triumph. Enemy arrows begin to whistle back, loosed from the rear ranks over the heads of their front line. Many strike the gate arch, skittering. Some find the narrow openings of your loopholes, their angles a cruel inverse of your own. One shaft shaves the stone beside your face, leaving a bright, fresh scratch and a hot sting across your cheek where it grazes skin. You flinch, then set your jaw and keep firing. "Oil!" the officer shouts. The word cuts through everything. Men at the cauldron move, as they have practiced, though practice never fully prepares for the weight of doing it with hands that can sweat fear. They heft the pot, careful, carrying it to a murder hole overhead. The smell intensifies, heavy and nauseating. A bucket is filled, then tipped. You hear it more than see it. The sudden high screams from the approach corridor as the boiling liquid cascades down onto the packed mass of men. Some of it hits shields, armor, stone. Some of it finds flesh, cloth, faces. The sound those struck make is different from battle shouts and death cries. It is thin and tearing, the voice of people discovering a new kind of pain. The smell of burned meat coils into the chamber. You swallow hard, throat working, stomach lurching. You have seen men die of wounds, of heat, of exhaustion. This is something else, a drawn-out, clinging violence that does not know when to stop. The rational part of you notes that the advance has stalled, that the pressure on the outer edge of the approach corridor has softened as men recoil, throw themselves back, try to escape the cascading fire. Another part of you, some quieter inner place, susses out its own verdict. This, too, is what holding a gate means. You fire again. The tide surges, recedes, surges. The enemy throws more bodies into the gap. When the front ranks falter, stumble over the choking, thrashing, or fallen, those behind shove them forward. Space is the rarest commodity now. No one willingly gives up their place in the corridor, whether that place is leading an assault or dying in it. You lose count of your arrows. Your quiver lightens, then empties. Someone thrusts another bundle into your hand without you asking. You are a component now, a moving piece in a mechanism designed to do one thing. Take the momentum of the assault and blunt it against wood, stone, and iron. The outer gate is gone. The approach corridor runs red. The inner gate stands. Its wood shudders with each impact as shields slam into it, as men strike it in frustrated rage, as bodies crash against its base. The iron bands vibrate under your hand when you reach back to steady yourself. The arch above your head sheds tiny flakes of mortar. At one point, the door actually moves inward a hand's breadth. A collective intake of breath sucks the air from the chamber as everyone feels it. The suggestion that this barrier too is not absolute. Men near the barricade brace themselves unconsciously, knees bending, feet planting more firmly, fingers tightening around spear hafts and shield grips. You step back from the loophole. You have to. The angle of fire is becoming less useful as the fight presses closer. Arrows loosed now risk hitting your own when they lean out to thrust or push. And the inner gate, for all its solidity, is beginning to feel less like a wall behind you and more like a thin board between you and a sea that has decided it wants your air. The officer catches your movement. "Shield!" he barks, pointing at the first barricade. "Brace!" You sling your bow over your shoulder. The motion feels strange, like setting aside a limb, but there is no time to sentimentalize. You grab your shield properly now, sliding your forearm through the straps, grip settling into the rough, sweat-worn handle. You step into the line at the barricade, shoulder to shoulder with other men whose faces you know only in fragments. A squint, a split lip, a mole on a cheek. The barricade is a crude thing. It was never meant to be a permanent structure, and it feels like it. Planks creak under your boots. Barrels shift subtly when you lean into them. The detritus crammed into gaps, from chairs to torn doors to bundled cloth, presses back like a horde of forgotten household ghosts. You plant your feet, set your shield at an angle, spear in your other hand, its point aimed toward the doorway. You become the plug in the throat. The inner gate shudders again. This time the wood cracks audibly, a sharp splintering sound that seems to echo off every stone in the chamber. A thin seam of light appears at the door's base, nothing more than a line, but it feels like the first trickle under a dam. You breathe in, deeply, despite the smoke, despite the stink of oil and sweat and fear. You feel the armor on your chest rise, then fall. You feel the edge of the shield's rim against your jaw. You feel your fingers tighten around the spear shaft, knuckles whitening under grime. Someone begins to chant. You don't know who starts it. A phrase in Greek, simple, repetitive, born somewhere between desperation and defiance. Kyrie, Sosun, Lord, save. Others pick it up, voices overlapping, uneven but insistent. It is not a formal liturgy, not a polished choir. It is the sound of men trying to speak to someone beyond the stone, beyond the smoke, beyond the arch that frames their likely death. You murmur it once, not loud, tasting the words as they rub against the back of your teeth. The inner gate jumps inward. This time it doesn't go back all the way. The bar across it, thick, ancient oak, reinforced with iron, groans, fibers torn, metal chafing stone. The hinges squeal, the crack widens. Through it, you see fingers. Just fingertips, pale and tense, groping blindly, trying to find purchase. Hands wedge into the gap, pushing, clawing at the edge of the door as if they might pull it wide by sheer will. You know those fingers will be followed by blades, by eyes, by the rest of the men attached to them. "That's it," the officer whispers, more to himself than to you. "Hold!" he shouts louder. You lean. Your shield presses into the back of the barricade presses into the floor presses into the earth. You add your weight to centuries of stone, trying to persuade it that now is not yet the time to let go. The door inches inward another fractional amount, then halts. On the other side, voices rise to a frenzy. You hear the grunt of effort, the crack of whips or the bark of orders? You can't tell. The pressure builds, your muscles tremble, your jaw clenches so hard, your teeth ache. And then, abruptly, the strain lessens. Not because the enemy has given up, but because the corridor in front of the gate has run out of air, of space, of living men to push. They must clear bodies, reorganize, bring up fresh attackers. For a heartbeat, the wall between their intention and your continuation thickens again. You sag slightly against your shield, not far. Not enough to lose your footing, just enough to let a thin strip of exhaustion surface. You feel your heart pounding, not just from exertion, but from something tighter, smaller, lodged high in your chest. Fear has been with you all morning. It has slunk along the edges of your awareness, a low, persistent animal that sometimes snarls, sometimes whines, rarely sleeps. But here, in this narrow chamber, with stone pressing close and your world reduced to the few paces between your feet and the gate, fear changes shape. It is no longer about death, abstract and vast. It is about failure in a single, specific task. The bar breaking, the door flying inward, your footing slipping on a piece of dislodged wood. It is about the possibility that your body, when the crucial second comes, will not do what you ask of it. You realize you are afraid not only of dying, but of how you might behave as you die. Will you hold? Will you push? Will you turn? The questions taste metallic in your mouth. You could run. The thought arrives, unwanted but undeniable. You are not shackled to this spot. Behind you, the passage opens back toward the deeper city. Shadows and smoke both conceal and invite. In theory, you could peel sideways from the barricade, slip into the moving dark, follow the stream of the living toward whatever refuge remains. No one might even see you go in the chaos. Your imagination, treacherous and swift, sketches the path, stepping back under cover of the man to your left, ducking behind a stack of crates, blending with a group of wounded being dragged rearward. You can almost feel the sensation of space opening in front of you instead of pressing. But that same imagination shows you another path. The gate bursting inward, an enemy pouring through, the barricade buckling, the line breaking, the men beside you glancing just once toward where you should be and seeing only empty air. Somewhere in the city later, someone speaking of those who stood and those who did not, voices careful, eyes more blunt. You think of the crack in the wall again, how your thumb fit into it at dawn, how small it was compared to everything else, how it still troubled you because it suggested that a part of the wall had once chosen to give way and then had that choice frozen into its surface. You understand now that you are being asked not just to hold a gate of wood and iron, but to decide where your own crack will form. Between your ribs, something tightens and then, strangely, eases. You feel your fear more clearly, but you also feel its borders. It is not infinite. It has edges. Inside those edges, something else exists, thin and trembling, but real. A stubbornness that is not the same as the mindless refusal you felt before you left the parapet. This one is quieter, more deliberate. It understands the odds, sees the size of the force outside, smells the smoke, hears the groaning timbers, and chooses anyway. You take another breath. You feel it slide through the narrow place inside your chest, scraping against your doubt, against your fatigue, against the deep animal instinct that wants nothing but continued existence. You keep your feet where they are. The ground shakes again. The great bombard has resumed its work somewhere above and to the side. The whole fortification system is being chewed from multiple directions at once. You feel those distant blows as a reminder. The wall may still fall. The gates may still be overrun. Your choice here may not alter the final line in whatever story will be told. And yet, standing in this narrow throat of the city, shield up, legs braced, shoulder pressed into wood and debris, and the bodies of men who have made the same decision, you realize that the value of the choice is not measured only in outcomes. It is measured in the exact sensation of this moment, the weight in your muscles, the heat of the oil's fumes in your nostrils, the throb of your cut forearm inside its sleeve, the knowledge that your back is turned not to the enemy but to the streets and people you have been trying all along to imagine as more than a shape on a map. Somewhere beyond the chamber, children are crying, bells are tolling, icons are being kissed with cracked lips. Somewhere, bakers' ovens have gone cold. Somewhere, a woman closes her fingers around a rosary, its beads worn smooth by other people's thumbs. Between them and what presses at this gate stands very little. A bar of wood and iron, a door, a barricade, a line of shields, and you. The pounding on the outer side of the inner gate resumes, harder, more furious, as fresh ranks throw their weight against it. You adjust your stance, feet a fraction wider, knees a fraction more bent. You set your shoulder more firmly, feel the gritty press of the shield's rim against your jaw, the slight give of the wooden planks at your back, the immovable cold of stone further behind. You are, in this second, as much architecture as you are flesh. And as the gate shudders again, as splinters spray from its stressed edges, as smoke curls along the ceiling like a dark tide searching for higher ground, you know, with a stark, painful clarity, that the real gate being tested is not the arch above your head, but the thin place inside you where fear and resolve collide. It does not happen all at once. Defeat never does. It arrives in pieces like plaster flaking from a ceiling, like hairline cracks that pretend to be nothing until they are the only thing left. The first sign is not at the gate in front of you. It comes from above. A shudder runs down through the masonry. Not a single jolt this time, but a drawn-out groan, stone complaining in a long, low voice. Dust pours from the joints overhead, not in little puffs, but in a steady sifting that turns air to gauze. The inner gate shakes under your shoulder, yet the vibration feels wrong, not the focused hammering of bodies and rams, but a deeper, longer wave, as if something larger has shifted in the structure of the walls. Men around you glance up despite themselves. The enemy is in front of you, the gate at your back, but your instincts tug your eyes upward, toward the ribs of the vault, toward the old stones that have carried weight since emperors wore different crowns and prayed in different ways. The pounding on the other side of the gate falters, just a little, enough that your muscles, straining against the barricade, notice the change in pressure. The relentless push slackens like a rope, suddenly losing a fraction of its tension. Voices outside thin, then swell again, but with a different note. A strain of excitement that doesn't match a stalled assault. Someone behind you, near the rear of the chamber, gasps. It is not the sound of pain, it is the sound of a man seeing something that rearranges his understanding of the day. You do not want to look. You know that turning your head, loosening your stance, letting your attention step away from the brute, simple task of holding the gate, is dangerous. Yet the sound hooks you. Your fear, stretched thin, snaps toward it like a thread pulled too tight. You risk it. You twist slightly, shielding still pressed against the barricade, and look back toward the narrow slit windows higher up in the chamber wall. The ones that face the inner city, the towers, the line of the outer defenses beyond. Through one slit, a shaft of smoky light angles in, carrying with it a slice of the outside world. In that thin frame, you see a tower. It is one of the main ones, a familiar tooth in the city's stone jaw, a place you have stood on other mornings, watching the siege unfold. Its crest is ragged now, crenels chewed by cannon, merlons broken. Smoke curls around it, but your eye goes at once to the thing that has always made it more than just stone. The banner. For as long as you have known war, a strip of cloth has crowned that tower. The imperial standard, gold and purple, its double-headed eagle spread as if trying to cover the city with its outstretched wings. Even on the hardest days, it has still been there, whipped by wind, stained by weather, insistently visible. Now, you see it stagger. For a moment, it flutters as usual, though you notice with fresh clarity how tattered it is, edges frayed into a fringe of desperate threads. Then the pole lurches. The cloth dips, catches, rises halfway, then jerks downward again. Tiny figures scurry at its base, silhouettes against the smoke. You cannot tell if they are defenders trying to steady it or attackers wrenching it down. The banner folds. Not gracefully, not ceremonially. It collapses in on itself like a bird struck mid-flight. One wing crumples. The head disappears into the coils. The color vanishes into the smoky grey of the background. For a bare second, the top of the tower is naked, an amputated stump with nothing to declare who owns it. Your stomach hollows. Silence moves through the chamber, not the absence of sound, but a sharp, inhaled pause that all the yelling and pounding and clash of metal cannot fully drown. Then, in that same narrow frame, another shape rises. At first, it is only a dark line, a staff pushed upward by unseen hands. Then cloth unfurls in the wind. Not purple and gold. A different pattern, a different color, deep, assertive, bearing symbols you have come to know through glimpses and rumors, crescents, calligraphy, shapes that have meant besieger to you for weeks. Now, they mean something else. The new banner snaps, catches the light, steadies. It does not look triumphant from here. Triumph is an idea. This is simply fact. Cloth on wind atop stone. Your mouth goes dry in a way no amount of smoke or dust could cause. Men near the slit curse, some under their breath, some aloud. One makes the sign of the cross so fast his fingers blur. Another stares with an expression stripped down to its bones. No anger, no tears. Only the stunned recognition that a thing he did not truly believe could happen has just begun to happen. You drag your gaze back to the gate. You have to. The city could be falling in 10 places at once, banners changing on half the towers. But in this chamber, the battle is as small and immediate as wood, iron, and bodies. The pounding surges again. This time, it carries a new energy, a fresh, sharp edge. The voices on the far side are louder. The blows come faster. Hope, their hope, has found something to feed on. Your hope has not vanished. It has simply grown narrower. It no longer wraps itself around words like victory or salvation. It has shrunk to fit inside moments. Hold this second, then the next, then the next. Do not run. Do not break before the wood does. The door flexes inward with a prolonged groan. You feel the bar grinding in its sockets. Feel the barricade behind you creak under the transferred strain. Your boots skid slightly on the stone where dust and blood have turned the floor slick. You reset your stance, driving your heels against a small ridge in the flagging, a worn step, a fortunate imperfection that gives you leverage. Your shoulder screams. The cut on your forearm reopens inside its sleeve. You feel warmth spreading, then cooling as air hits damp cloth. Your lungs burn. Your heart punches at your ribs, not just from exertion, but from the unignorable knowledge that you are standing in the path of something that, elsewhere along the walls, has already begun to get what it wants. The officer at your side does not look up again. He stares at the gate, jaw clenched, eyes bright in a face streaked with soot. Whatever he feels about the banner, he locks it behind the blunt mechanics of this one choke point. His hand grips the haft of his spear. His lips move soundlessly, whether in prayer, curse, or resolve. You cannot tell. A crack spiderwebs across one of the door's planks. You see it appear, dark and thin, starting at the edge of one iron band and running diagonally toward the center. It is so small compared to the mass of the wood that under other circumstances, it would be nothing. Now, it is everything. You cannot look away. It grows with each impact, branching, multiplying, the way cracks in ice spread over a pond when a stone hits. You remember the crack in the parapet from dawn, how insignificant it seemed under your thumb, how it nonetheless unsettled you. This is the same line, drawn with a heavier hand. The door jumps again. This time the crack widens suddenly, a splinter leaping free, spinning through the air like a small, sharp bird before clattering onto the floor at your feet. A thin blade of light knifes through the gap, stabbing into the chamber, cutting across dust and smoke and faces. Through that blade, for the first time, you see an eye. It flashes in the narrow opening, dark, intent, furious. It is not the eye of a faceless, distant enemy. It is simply a man, straining on the other side of the wood, pupils blown wide in the dim, sweat shining on his brow. Your gazes intersect for less than a heartbeat. He bares his teeth. You do not know if it is a grin or a grimace. Then another blow slams into the door, and the gap widens with a ripping shriek of torturous wood. The eye vanishes, replaced by a wedge of shield, the iron rim forced into the opening, using the crack as a lever. "Spears!" the officer shouts. The men nearest the gate thrust their weapons into the opening, jabbing blindly. You hear impacts, wood on wood, metal on metal, a grunt of pain, a curse in a language foreign to your tongue but familiar to your ears. Blood, someone's, perhaps several someone's, splashes onto the inner face of the door, red stark against the blackened wood. You cannot thrust from where you stand behind the barricade. You can only push, hold, be wait. The crack tears the door open just enough for a hand to reach through. It scrabbles against the bar, trying to find purchase. Fingers strain, tendons standing out like cables. A spear point flashes, skewering the wrist. The hand jerks, withdraws, leaving a smear of blood on the wood. Another hand replaces it. For every repelled grasp, another comes. The gap widens bit by bit. Splinters fall like rain. Your world has shrunk to inches, even millimeters of movement. The drums outside swell. You can hear them even here, muffled through stone but insistent, urging, commanding. They do not understand gates or barricades or cracks. They understand only forward. A new sound cuts through the chaos, a horn, not yours. Their note, higher, sharper, triumphant. Somewhere, out of sight of this chamber but not out of reach of its consequences, something has gone their way. Another tower taken, a postern gate forced, a section of wall overrun. The horn's call pours into the corridor in front of your gate, into the lungs of the men pushing at it. The next blow hits with doubled force. The door convulses. You feel the bar lift. Just a finger's breadth, but enough to change the angle of your weight. You stagger, catching yourself against the barricade, shoulder screaming in fresh protest. The men beside you curse, redoubling their efforts, backs bowing, feet scrabbling for purchase. "Hold!" the officer roars, his voice cracks. It does not matter. Holding is no longer just an order. It is an instinct more deeply wired than retreat. You press, teeth bared, vision narrowing, until the only thing that exists is the dark, groaning shape of the door in front of you and the pressure driving through it. Something in the bar gives. You hear it, an ugly, tearing creak as ancient wood fibers surrender. One of the iron brackets that hold it in place shears away from the stone with a sound like a snapped bone. The bar lists, one end dropping an inch, maybe two. The door surges inward, not enough to open fully, but enough that the calculus changes. Light knifes in through wider cracks. Hands thrust through, grab at spears, at edges, at anything they can find. A blade, narrow and curved, flashes into the gap, slicing a man's forearm as he tries to stab through. He howls, falls back, clutching the wound, blood pouring between his fingers. The barricade shudders. Its makeshift planks shift. A barrel rolls half an inch. Sacks slump. The entire structure presses into your shins. You plant your feet harder, ignoring the flare of pain in your knees. You feel the sweat on your palms inside the shield straps, slick and treacherous. You tighten your grip until your fingers cramp. For a moment, everything holds. It is a crooked hold, a temporary hold, a hold full of strain and noise and splintering. But it is still a hold. And then, above the din, another sound threads its way down the corridor. Running feet. Not from the enemy side, from behind. You dare a glance over your shoulder. Men are pouring into the far end of the chamber from the inner city. Some are soldiers, faces set, weapons drawn. Others are not. You see a man in a craftsman's apron, still dusted with flour or plaster, clutching a short sword that does not fit his hand as comfortably as a tool would. A youth barely past boyhood, eyes enormous, holding a spear that looks too tall for him. An older man with a bandaged head, staggering, supported by a woman whose lips move constantly in what might be prayer or might be directions. They are not all coming to help. Some veer away down side corridors, following shouted guidance from officers trying to steer non-combatants towards safer, deeper parts of the city. Others push closer, filling gaps, grabbing loose shields, snatching up dropped weapons. The chamber swells with humanity. The air grows hotter, thicker. The walls seem to press closer under the weight of breath and noise, and the invisible mass of all these separate stories colliding in one place. In this crush, you feel the line between soldier and citizen blur. You are no longer simply defending a strategic point. You are the last organized surface on which the city's scattering pieces are breaking. The door jumps again. The bar tears free on one side, falling away in a slant that drains strength from the hinge like blood from a wound. The gate bursts inward by a hand's breadth, then more. Through the widening gap, you see more than hands now. You see faces, shoulders, the glint of eyes, the wet shine of teeth shouting words you don't need to understand. You also see above them, for the first time, the color of the cloth they carry, the same color that now flies from the captured tower. It is closer here, close enough that you can see the stitching, the way the fabric snaps under the force of its own bearer's movement. It fills the gap briefly like a tongue of some conquering flame. Your shield takes the first real hit. A blade crashes into it, the impact jarring your arm up to the shoulder. You feel the bite of metal through wood, see the point emerge a finger's breadth through the interior, quivering inches from your nose. You grunt, shove back. The blade withdraws, leaving a splintered wound in the shield's face. Another strike. Another. Spears thrust from both sides. The opening at the gate becomes a frantic exchange of iron and flesh. You are no longer just weight. You are target. Something hot slices across your thigh where your armor gaps at the joint. Your leg nearly buckles. You taste bile and copper and the stale residue of the last bread you ate. You do not fall. A man beside you does. An enemy spear punches through a gap in the barricade, catching him under the ribs. He gasps, a short, astonished sound, and collapses sideways, shield dropping. For a moment, there is a hole where his body was, a sudden absence that the pressure from outside lunges to exploit. You move. There is no conscious decision. Your body, afforded no luxury of indecision, leans into that empty space, filling it with your own torso, your own shield, your own trembling legs. For a heartbeat, you bear more of the force alone. It feels as if you are trying to hold back a flood with your chest. Then someone else slides into place on your other side. Another shoulder touches yours, another shield overlaps yours. The line repairs itself, ragged but intact. The officer's voice, raw and cracking, tries one last time to knit courage into words. "Here!" he shouts, not with speeches, not with promises of glory, but with the blunt reality of location. "Here!" It is all he can say. It is all there is left to say. Somewhere behind you, deeper in the city, a bell begins to toll. Not the measured cadence of liturgy, not the sharp, panicked peal of first alarm. This is different. A heavy, slow, repeated strike that seems to say one thing again and again. It is happening. It is happening. It is happening. The sound fills the chamber, threads through the clash and cries and grunts, seeps under your armor. It mixes with the drums outside, the horns, the shouted foreign words. Together, they weave a soundscape that has no center, only edges, the edges of walls, the edges of lives, the edges of choices. the gate gives, not all at once, but enough. One hinge snaps with a shriek. The top corner of the door lurches inward, opening a wedge of space no barricade can fully cover. The line staggers. Men scramble to shift, to turn shields, to thrust spears into the widening breach. The enemy comes through, not in an elegant, organized line, but in a boiling spill of bodies forced through a too narrow opening. The first man squeezes past the shattered doorframe, shield raised, blade out. He takes 2 steps onto the stone inside the gate and dies almost immediately under 3 converging spear points. He falls, not grandly, but awkwardly, tripping the man behind him. That second man flails, tries to find his footing, slips on the blood already slicking the floor, crashes into the barricade. Your shield takes some of his weight, your ribs take the rest. You growl, shove, feel the press of armor on armor, the hot gust of his breath through the slit in his visor. He dies too, but he dies closer. You feel it more than see it, the shudder that runs through his body as a blade finds a seam, the sudden slackness in his limbs. His weight increases as life leaves it. You shove him backward with all the strength left in your legs. He topples, disappearing under the feet and bodies behind him. For a few seconds, the breach clogs, dead and living entangle. Movement slows, snarls, becomes a knot of limbs and metal that neither side can navigate cleanly. But knots can be untangled with enough pulling, enough cutting, enough time. You are running out of all 3. Your arms feel like they belong to someone else, someone heavier, slower. Each breath is a theft from air that seems increasingly unwilling to give itself to lungs filled with smoke and dust. Your vision tunnels, edges darkening. Sounds blur into each other, and yet, in this narrowing, something sharpens. You become acutely aware of the weight of every second. They do not stretch anymore, they fall. Each one drops into the pit of this day and vanishes. You stand on their edge, spending them without any guarantee of what they purchase. You realize with a clarity that aches that this wild, brutal, cramped defense in a chamber choked with smoke and terror is likely to be the measure by which you judge yourself if you live long enough to judge anything. The thought is less grand than it sounds. It is practical. It is immediate. Hold here, like this, for as long as you can. Not because the city will necessarily be saved if you do. Not because history will carve your name into stone. But because there is a version of yourself who did not run, who did not turn, who stayed in the narrow place when it mattered. You have no control over banners, over emperors, over cannons, over the long, slow breaking of walls. You have control over this, your feet on this flagstone, your shoulder under this shield, your spear angling forward, then back, then forward again. In the roar and dust and press of bodies, as the gate finally yawns wider and the enemy begins to seep into the chamber in greater numbers, you feel time thinning to a few last bright threads, and you know that the story of this day will not remember your name, but it will be built on the seconds you are about to spend. In the end, you do not remember the exact moment the gate stops being a gate. There is no clean line where holding becomes breaking, where defense becomes aftermath. The pounding, the shouting, the hot animal press of bodies, that is still there. And then, at some point, it isn't. Sound does not vanish, it alters. The sharp cries soften, stretch, drift away down corridors that no longer belong to you. What you remember is the floor, stone, cold and gritty against your cheek, a pattern of tiny fractures in the flagging right next to your eye, filled with dark dust and a thin thread of spilled oil. Your hand, palms up, fingers curled like a sleeping child's, lying inches away but feeling as if it belongs to someone else. The weight across your legs, mail, cloth, a fallen body you cannot identify from this angle. You lie still, not from decision at first, but from the simple fact that nothing in you responds to the idea of movement. Your chest does its work on its own. Breath in, shallow and painful. Breath out longer, whistling through lips that taste of iron and ash. Your heart continues to knock against your ribs, slower now, as if unsure whether further effort is required. Around you, the chamber murmurs. There are no structured orders, no coordinated pushes, no chant of "hold." Instead, you hear individual sounds pulling apart like fibers from a frayed rope. A man groaning in a high, thin voice, a wet rattle at the end of each exhale, the scrape of metal being dragged across stone, a muffled sob, footsteps, many, varied, overlapping, moving without hurry, without the urgent rhythm of assault. Boots that are not yours. You open your eyes wider. Light has changed. It is not the blade of brightness knifing through cracks in the gate. That gate is gone now, or open, or irrelevant. Instead, light comes from behind you, from the passages leading into the city. It is grey and diffuse, thickened by smoke, but it is daylight, not the cramped, angry glow of torches and fires. You become aware of weight shifting off your legs. The body that pinned you moves, rolled perhaps, by hands that do not care whether you are trapped beneath, or lifted briefly in a search for anything worth taking. The pressure eases. Pain floods into the newly freed limbs, a tingling, stabbing ache that feels almost like insult. How dare flesh complain when it has just been spared further crushing? You test your fingers. They twitch, they curl. You dig them into the cold stone, feeling grit bite into cuts, grounding yourself in the simplest fact of contact. You push, slowly, pulling your chest up from the floor. The movement sends a wave of dizziness through your skull, as if your brain were a bowl of water sloshing against bone. You roll onto your back. The vault of the chamber looms above you, a dull, soot-streaked ceiling crossed by old ribs of stone. Dust still sifts down intermittently, stirred by distant vibrations, the aftershocks of impacts elsewhere. The air is a layered thing. Powder smoke, oil fumes, the copper scent of blood, the sour tang of fear gone stale. Silhouettes move across that ceiling. Men pass above you, figures in armor, in loose cloth, some bearing the lines and shapes of gear you recognize from the siege, others marked by different cuts, different metals, different colors. The distinction between ours and theirs has dissolved into simple presence, those standing, those not. You turn your head. The barricade you leaned into has slumped. Barrels lie on their sides, some staved in, leaking water or wine that mingles with darker liquids on the floor. Planks are snapped, nails twisted, sacks torn open, spilling grain that will never be baked into bread. Shields are scattered like discarded beetle shells. Beyond where the gate stood, the corridor is no longer empty. Men in unfamiliar armor move there, stepping carefully around bodies and debris, their swords low, their eyes alert. Some speak to each other in quick phrases, gestures sharp and efficient. One pauses to nudge a fallen defender with his boot, checking for life. Finding none, he moves on. Another stoops to retrieve a discarded spear, weighing it, testing its balance, then handing it to a companion with a brief nod. None of them look at you for more than a moment. You are not a threat lying flat on the stone, and you are not yet a prize. You are a fact. Another breathing piece of the defeated city that will have to be accounted for later, when the immediate work of fire and plunder and consolidation is done. Closer, in the muddle of the chamber's center, you see the officer who stood beside you at the barricade. He sits slumped against a broken crate, back to the wall, legs splayed. His spear is gone. His shield lies at an angle, half covering his left boot. His head is tilted to one side. For a moment you think he is dead, then his chest rises shallowly, and he blinks, slow and stubborn, as if refusing to give the world the satisfaction of claiming his eyes. His gaze slides over you, then returns, focusing with effort. You see recognition flicker, faint, but there. The corner of his mouth moves, attempting something that might have been a word, a command, a benediction. No sound comes. He breathes instead one more time and lets his head rest more heavily against the stone. You could crawl to him. You could press your hand to his, or tell him that you saw him stand, that you felt his shoulder against yours. that he did not leave the narrow place. The thought surfaces, fragile and earnest. Then another thought rises with it. You might not reach him before someone else interrupts, before foreign boots and foreign voices claim the space between you for their own purposes. You stay where you are, half sitting, half sprawled, the decision made not from cowardice, but from a recognition that there are as many kinds of farewell as there are wounds. You look at the bar. It lies on the floor, one end still caught in its bracket, the other snapped, the iron band torn free from the wall. It is heavier than you imagined when it was above your head, an abstract weight. Now, on the ground, it looks like a felled tree limb, stripped of bark, scored by the friction of the day. You remember the moment it gave way, the sound of fibers surrendering, the tilt of the door. You realize you no longer feel anger at the wood, nor at the stone that cracked, nor at the hinges that broke, nor at the iron that bent. They were asked to bear more than they could, for longer than they were meant to. So were you. You push yourself further up, sitting fully now, legs stretched out, back hunched. Pain settles into its territories. Your thigh burns where it was cut. Your shoulder throbs deep and slow. Your forearms sing with the raw sting of overused muscle. Your head feels packed with wool. And beneath all this, a deeper ache hums, a broad, bruised soreness where something inside you has been struck, not broken, but altered. A hand appears in your field of vision, not lunging, offered. You flinch instinctively, then force your eyes upward along the arm to the face above it. A young man, his beard barely more than a shadow, peers down at you. His helmet sits slightly crooked on his head, pushed askew by some earlier impact. His eyes, dark and rimmed with exhaustion, hold no particular malice. They are wary, assessing, and, unexpectedly, curious. He says something. The words slide past your understanding, but the tone is not a bark of command. It is closer to the sound one makes when asking if a load is too heavy, if a wound is too deep, if a stranger is still entirely inside his own body. You stare at the offered hand for a moment, then take it. His grip is firm, calloused. He hauls you to your feet with an economy of effort that speaks less of strength than of habitual labor. For a second, your legs wobble, knees threatening to fold. He steadies you, fingers tightening on your arm, then releases you once you stand solid. He points toward the inner corridor, not with a shove, not with a blade, but with the flat of his palm, the gesture weary and practical. The meaning is clear enough. Move inward, toward whatever pen or square or gathered group of captives they are organizing. You are no use to anyone here, least of all yourself. You nod. He gives you a last, brief look, then turns away to join a group prying open a chest near the wall, soldiers' rations perhaps, or stored equipment. Life, for him, is already shifting from the act of taking the gate to the logistics of occupying it. You step carefully across the chamber. The floor is a treacherous patchwork of broken wood, spilled grain, shards of pottery, dropped weapons, and bodies. You pick your way between them, mindful of where you place your boots, not from squeamishness, but from a strange, lingering respect. These forms around you, friend and foe both, are no longer part of the battle. They are part of the aftermath. You do not wish to tread on them if you can avoid it. As you pass the officer, his eyes flicker again. You pause, just long enough to incline your head. A small, stiff gesture that tries to compress into itself all the words your mouth cannot shape right now. His gaze holds yours. Something like acknowledgement moves between you, slow as a tired wave. Then you move on. The corridor beyond the chamber is crowded. Defenders, disarmed now, some bleeding, some simply stunned, shuffle along under the watch of armed men whose accents and armor mark them as the new owners of your air. You merge into the stream. One more battered figure among many. No one here is special. No one is invisible. You are all simply counted. You pass narrow doors flung open, revealing storerooms already half emptied, their contents dragged out in the first greedy sweep. You see a tapestry torn from its hooks, lying in the dust, its once bright threads muted by grime. A broken icon face down on the floor, halo cracked, a helmet rolling in a slow circle until it reaches a wall and settles, its empty interior dark. The further you move from the gate, the more the sounds change. The metallic clash and shouted commands recede, replaced by the wider, more varied noise of a city being taken. Shouts in alleys, the crash of a door forced in, the wail of someone dragged from hiding, the shrill laughter of those who have found something they wanted. Above it all, the occasional isolated scream flares, high, brief, then cut off. You do not look for their sources. Your mind records them from a distance, like lightning flashes beyond a hill. For now, your focus narrows to the immediate, placing one foot in front of the other, staying upright when your legs want to buckle, keeping your breathing even enough that the black, narrowing at the edges of your vision, doesn't close entirely. You emerge eventually into open air, a small courtyard, enclosed on 3 sides by walls, and on the 4th by the severe face of a church whose doors stand flung wide. People cluster here, men, women, children, some kneeling, some sitting, some standing rigidly as if too tired to choose any posture. A few soldiers, both of your side and the other, hover at the edges, watchful. The sky above is no longer colourless. Smoke has thickened in patches, turning the blue into streaked grey, but light still filters through, indifferent. The sun touches rooftops where new flags have appeared. Green, red, symbols sharp and clear against the haze. From this angle, you can see more of them, along the line of the outer walls, on towers, atop certain domes. The city's horizon has been rewritten. You sink down onto a low stone trough at the courtyard's edge. Your body sighs in relief and protest. Muscles relax in sudden, uncontrolled ways, making your arms tremble, your legs bounce once, involuntarily. Your mail digs into new bruises. You let your head tip back briefly, eyes closing against the glare, then open them again, unwilling to surrender even that small measure of awareness. Nearby, a woman wipes soot from a little girl's face with the edge of her scarf. The child's eyes are enormous, staring not at the soldiers, but at the way the light catches in a drifting haze of dust motes. Her small hand clutches a wooden toy, some carved animal, its ear broken off. The woman's fingers shake, but she persists, cleaning a streak of dried tears from the girl's cheek. It is a tiny act of reclamation, an assertion that faces and hands still matter in a world overtaken by walls and gates. Across the courtyard, a young man, perhaps a scribe, given the ink stains on his fingers, sits with his back to the church wall, staring at his empty hands as though surprised to find nothing there to write on. His lips move, forming words silently. Maybe he is reciting something he remembers. Maybe he is drafting already the lines in which he will someday try to contain today. You watch them with a strange, quiet tenderness. Not pity, that implies distance. You are too near, too entangled. What you feel is closer to the sensation of touching a bruise and recognizing the pain in another's flinch as almost indistinguishable from your own. Your gaze drifts upward again, to the line of the walls. From here, you see the section where you stood at dawn, a jagged silhouette against the smoke, its parapet broken, its stone streaked with ash. Figures move along it, small and indistinct. Some wear helmets like yours, but they move differently now, their posture still keyed to defense even as the purpose of their watch has changed. Others wear turbans, their clothes cut differently, their steps assured. The wall, which once defined inside and outside, now holds both on its back. You think of all the mornings you stood there, shivering in the damp air, touching the stone, telling yourself that it was a fact. You think of your thumb pressed into that first thin crack. You think of the moment in the chamber when the bar gave way, when the door shifted, when the line broke. You expect, perhaps, to feel only failure. Instead, something more complicated settles over you. Yes, the city is taken. Banners have changed. Gates stand open, not because you chose to open them, but because they were forced. The walls did not hold. That is true. Yet there is another truth layered beneath it. You held for a time where you could. You did not step away from the narrow place when it narrowed further. You stayed until staying was no longer a matter of choice. You realize, slowly, that the meaning of what you did is not entirely written by the outcome. It lives also in the memory of muscle and stone, in the way your shoulder remembers the weight of the gate, in the way your hands remember the roughness of the bar, in the way your ears remember the sound of the wall learning its own limits, in the way some part of you, deep, quiet, remembers the exact second when fear and resolve met inside your chest and neither walked away unmarked. Around you, the conquered city continues to rearrange itself. Flames lick from a distant rooftop. Cries rise and fall. Foreign words echo through streets that once held only your language. Somewhere, new authorities are already making lists, assigning quarters, planning prayers of thanks to their own god. Somewhere, relics are being seized, icons taken down, silver collected, books assessed for burning or preservation. You sit, breathing, watching the light move slowly along the upper edges of the walls. Time, indifferent to sieges and surrenders, resumes its habit of stretching days into sequences of ordinary seconds. Even now, in the immediate aftermath, small normalities begin to creep back. A woman smoothing her hair, a man adjusting a sandal strap, a boy picking up a dropped loaf, brushing ash from it carefully before taking a bite. You feel tired enough to sleep for 100 years. You know you won't. There will be instructions soon. Where to go, what to do, how to stand in the new order. There may be exile, or service under new masters, or chains. There may be more fighting, in alleys and houses and hidden rooms. Or there may simply be work, clearing rubble, burying the dead, mending what can be mended. You have no control over that yet. What you have in this small wedge of time between the last roar of the cannons and the first fully formed demands of the conquerors is the ability to sit on a worn stone trough in a smoke-streaked courtyard and feel. You lower your gaze to your hands. They are filthy, knuckles scraped, nails rimmed with black, lines in the skin filled with grey paste of dust and dried blood. Little fragments of stone cling to the small cuts, like relics too insignificant for any church to house. You flex your fingers, watching the skin crack, the scabs pull. You realize that long after the banners change again, long after some chronicler decides how to phrase the fall in a language elegant enough to satisfy his patron, these hands will still remember the texture of this day. You think of the wall one more time, not as an abstract line on a map, but as a living length of stone that was built, maintained, trusted, tested, and finally overwhelmed. You think of all the other hands that have pressed against it over the centuries. Builders, defenders, children tracing the grooves, priests blessing it with water and words, enemies touching it with intent to break. You think of your own hands joining that long, anonymous crowd. You do not know what the city will be called in 100 years. You do not know which stories will be polished and displayed, which will be tucked away, which will be forgotten altogether. You suspect that your name will not be one that anyone repeats. The thought settles into you like dust settling onto stone. Inevitable, quiet, not unkind. You breathe. Smoke, ash, salt. The faint, lingering trace of incense from the open church door. You stand slowly, bones complaining. The sky has tilted further toward afternoon. Shadows lengthen, stretching like tired bodies along the ground. On the walls, new flags still whip in the wind, their colours bright against the grey. The old standard lies somewhere now, trampled, torn, perhaps already taken as a prize, a trophy, a future relic in someone else's story. You turn once, looking back toward the line of battered stone where you began the day. You imagine, not with your eyes but with some inner sense, the crack under your thumb at dawn, the shiver under your boots when the great bombard spoke, the rasp of the bar in its brackets, the strained weight of the gate leaning inward. You feel, all at once, an almost fierce affection for that flawed, overburdened wall. Not because it did the impossible, because it tried, and because you tried with it. You know, with a certainty that needs no words, that you will be able to close your eyes, years from now, and feel again the exact contour of that stone under your palm, the precise angle of your shoulder under the shield, the way the city's breath pressed against your back as the world pushed at your front. And long after banners have rotted and empires have traded names, you carry the memory of the wall inside you, like a scar that knows the shape of a vanished door.